find with the green signs over the doors. Those are the ones to go out of. Please, can you ensure your mobile phones are either switched off or switched to silent? And councillors, can I remind you to speak directly into your microphone, please, and make sure your card is pushed firmly into the console as this meeting is webcast. And members of the public, I would like to say that as a committee we understand that matters under consideration tonight can be emotive, and therefore I would ask that you are please respectful to those around you and to the committee, and refrain from any form of disturbance whatsoever, please. Thank you. So now we move to the main item of business. And the minutes of the meeting, which took place on the 4th of November 2015, have been on the table for the last 30 minutes. Are you content that I sign these as a correct record of that meeting? Thank you. Have there been any apologies for absence, Fiona?
Thank you, Chairman. I've had apologies from Councillors Brian Ellis, Dennis Lee, Stephen Reynolds and Simon Thornton.
Thank you. Have any members, declared any interest before the meeting?
None, Chairman.
And have there been any questions received from members of the public?
None, Chairman.
Elizabeth, are there any updates to government guidance or legislation that the committee should be aware of?
None this evening. Thank you, Chairman.
So in the event of site inspections being necessary as a result of consideration of the applications at this meeting, these will be held on Monday the 11th of January 2016 at a time to be agreed. And moving on to the planning application item A1, WA 2015-1008. This is Whitley Station Garage, Coombe Lane, Wormley, GU8 5TB. And Tim, would you like to introduce the application, please?
Thank you, Chairman. Members, the site is located to the western side of Coombe Lane in Wormley. The site outlined here in red on screen. The site comprises a garage/car repair workshop and vehicle yard, which is currently vacant. The application seeks to change use for the site from a car repairs garage to a mixed use, including car repairs, car sales and the preparation of cars for sale. Additionally, 2 low-level windows are proposed to be inserted in the eastern elevation of the building, of the workshop building facing Coombe Lane. Just point a few things out in terms of the site surrounding area. It's largely residential, obviously and the main road at the front. And here is an aerial photograph just to help show you the site is here, and that is the current yard here. So this is the proposed site plan. As outlined earlier in the proposal, proposal includes to retain the car repairs on site, which is indicated to be within the building here. Visitor parking here. The car sales element of the use is proposed to be display the cars on the existing hard standing that is here. The car washing facility is an ancillary to the uses proposed only, and so that is not an independent car wash facility. This is the 2 windows proposed on the eastern elevation of the building that would front the road. Here's some site photographs on site. So here you can see the existing, what's referred to as the yard area. This is where the car sales element of the use is proposed. And this is a photograph from outside the site on Coombe Lane. You can see the main building here. Where this current sign is, it's proposed for the two windows to be inserted. The boundary treatment to the site is proposed to be retained. There is gating here to access to the yard, parking here and round the side here. If I can turn members' attention to the update sheet, members should note the additional information and points made by the applicant there, and the amendments to the report officers have outlined there. Officers have carefully reviewed and revisited the conditions recommended in the agenda, and on the back of that we have actually, Chairman, making a verbal recommendation for an additional condition, which will form condition 9, which I have some wording for here. Really this is just to ensure that the mixed uses proposed are to be captured on a plan where they say they're going to be. So really it's just a condition to try and clarify that. So for the benefit of everyone, I'm going to read out the condition. So the condition will read as such: the use hereby permitted shall not commence until and unless a plan has been submitted to and approved in writing by the local planning authority showing the proposed areas for operation of the respective composite uses of car repairs, car sales and preparations of cars for sale, including any ancillary activities. The use hereby permitted shall not operate on the site other than in accordance with the approved plan unless otherwise first agreed in writing by the local planning authority, and the reasons is in the interests of protection of the amenity of the surrounding area in accordance with policies D1, D4 of the local plan and the MPPF. So, Chairman, in terms of the determining issues for the application, I'd like to draw members' attention to the matters of planning judgment on the right-hand side of the screen. The site is within the green belt. However, the proposal would utilise an existing brownfield site and is considered to be an appropriate form of development in this location. The proposal would continue employment-generating uses for the site. The visual impact of 2 new windows at the front are considered to be minimal, along with a car sales area which actually forms back into the site away from the public road. Subject to conditions in the agenda and the suggested additional condition, the proposal is not considered to therefore cause harm to surrounding residential amenities. Officers therefore recommend permission be granted, subject to conditions informed as in the agenda and the suggested additional condition earlier on. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Tim. Can I just ask a question? Did I hear you say condition 9? Because I've only got conditions 1 to 6 in front of me. What was the additional? Pardon? It was 7, you said. No, I said 9. You said 9. It's supposed to be 7. Thank you very much. Okay. Thank you very much, Tim. Right. Now, we were to have a speaker, but unfortunately he's not able to be here. He was the objector. So that was the only speaker this evening. So, members, it's over to you. Councillor Holder.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. This is in my ward, and I have to say that it is a very popular site. A considerable amount of commuters drop off their cars in the morning and go up to London and then pick them back up again in the evening. And as a result, I would like to make a small amendment, if I may, to condition 5, which states, if I can find it, the hours of opening should be, I'd like to amend that to the working hours should be, because people will come back from their offices after 6 o'clock, and I don't see any reason why the office shouldn't be open for them to pay their bills and collect the cars without the garage itself being open. So I'd like to see the working hours should be 9 to 6 and not opening hours. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Holder. If I may just make one remark in regard to that suggestion that you've made, that would still be quite a disturbance possibly to the area because, excuse me, because of cars driving up, stopping, people getting out, etc. and so forth. So that would just seem to me to be, but I don't know what my colleagues feel about that as well. Councillor James.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I'm happy to second his recommendation for the opening hours because it is used in that way now. There is no change. People arrive at 6 o'clock in the morning, drop off their cars to take the train, and they get back in the evening and they pick them up, as it's been for 20 years, a car repair place. Those are the hours. What Councillor Holder is saying, that the new plan for the car sales bit can have the time from 9 till 6, but the other bit with the office, where they pick up their cars, should be, obviously they can't do the work and stuff, but for people to collect their cars, because otherwise that is a good facility for the community to use, and if you restrict the hours, then that will stop. But I'm happy to support the timing, and I'm happy to support the officer's recommendation.
Okay, thank you for that explanation, Councillor James. Councillor Martin.
Thank you. With regards to condition 5, I'm not really that fussed either way. What it says is the hours of opening shall be as stated on the submitted application form, which indicates that the applicant themselves have proposed those hours. If the applicant themselves are proposing those hours, I'm entirely content to leave it at that. At the end of the day, we are not imposing those, we are merely conditioning what they have said, what they have stated that they would use. So I'd be entirely content to leave the condition as it is. The officers may want to offer further guidance on that. Broadly speaking, I think this is near the station. There are going to be car movements to and from. I don't think that this is going to materially increase the vehicle movements in the area. It has been operating as a car repair garage for a good number of years. And I think it will be very difficult for this council to object to it, and I'd be entirely comfortable to support the officer's recommendations here.
Councillor Martin.
Thank you. Yes, I do agree with that, and I mean I will be supporting the proposal to grant permission. The only concern I have is with the car wash, and if, for instance, the operator were to begin a car wash operation for any number of cars, would that require an additional planning application, or ought we to have a condition which limits the car wash facility to for a particular sale of cars and associated works? Would that be a sensible precaution to add?
Chairman, if I may, just to clarify, the purpose of the additional condition is to ensure that those uses are at a scale commensurate with how they've been described in the application documents. The area for car washing on that plan that you can see on screen is fairly limited and would be self-limiting to a degree itself, given the size of it. If you feel it's necessary, then we could add an additional condition to say that the car washing activities on the site shall be ancillary to the preparation of cars for sale, if that would give you extra comfort.
Certainly, I wasn't able to determine that from the wording which you read out, so maybe it therefore is less than obvious, and maybe therefore we should be more specific.
Chairman, if I could just come back on the comments in relation to condition 5. From an enforcement point of view, it would be very difficult to have two standards of acceptability about when the site can be operating and not, because as Councillor Martin said, they are the hours that the applicant has requested that the use be allowed to operate on, and that would restrain them from opening their business outside of those hours. So to have a different set of circumstances where things could happen outside of those hours would be very difficult to enforce and monitor. So I do recommend that, given the circumstances, that you stick to condition 5, because that seems to be, from the business point of view, an acceptable proposal to the applicant, but I also think it's reasonable from the viewpoint of amenity, because it restricts business use in times where you'd expect there to be quiet for the purposes of the residents. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Elizabeth. So is it pertaining to this condition 5? Yes. No. No. So we have had a proposal, we've had it seconded, and now we need to know if we want to pursue that or whether we're happy for condition 5 to be left as writ in the officer's report. So are we happy to leave the condition as it's written?
I withdraw my recommendation and I go along with the officer's recommendation.
Okay, that seems to have dealt with that one. And so now, Councillor Wheatley.
Thank you very much, Madam Chairman. I was just thinking, while we're stipulating about the use of the car wash, I think we ought to remember that normally after a service, very often garages valet the cars for the clients. So I think maybe we ought to say not only the sale, but also after servicing, but not, as it were, for any off-the-road people, just genuine clients. Thank you.
Thank you. And I note in the update that the servicing and repair of vehicles can be relocated to Cooper's Place Industrial Estate. So is that right, Elizabeth?
Yes, Chairman. Just to clarify that, it may well be that the existing or previous existing car repairs business has now relocated, but the application still needs to be determined on its merits as a proposal for a mixed use to retain car repairs element and the additional uses. So this isn't the fact that the previous car repairs operator may have moved to additional premises doesn't change the description of this development. If they'd wanted to, they could have come in and amended their proposal to say car repairs has gone, this is just about car sales and preparation, but they haven't done that. They're maintaining an application for retention of car repairs and the other two composite uses. So the fact the site is vacant, one would assume it's for a future occupier to come in and operate those uses. As ever, planning is about land use rather than individual occupiers. Thank you, Chairman.
Are there any more comments or questions? So are we happy that we accept the additional condition, number 7, as described by Tim? That's agreed. Okay, so on with the recommendation then. And subject to conditions 1 to 7, and informative...
Sorry, Chairman, are we having an additional condition 8 as well? I see the officers nodding following the discussion.
Chairman, I think we need the condition to capture the car washing activities on the site and to ensure that they remain ancillary to the preparation of cars for sale and in association with the servicing and repair of vehicles at the site. So this is 8. This is number 8.
Please, can you indicate you're all happy with an 8th condition? Thank you. Okay, start again. The recommendation is that subject to conditions 1 to 8 and informatives 1 to 3, as set out on pages 21 to 23 of the report, permission be granted. May I have those in favour of permission to grant, please?
That's all in favour.
Thank you. Recommendation to grant is agreed. Sorry, let's switch on then. And so the next item is item A2, WA 201511758, Rockwood, Hazelmere Road, Whitley, GU8 5PU. And Tim, is it Tim? You're introducing this one. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Chairman. So members, the application location is located northeast of the Rockwood estate, to the east of Hazelmere Road. The site comprises an existing hangar building as labelled here on the location plan. There is a public footpath that runs along the south of the site, along here and down here. Here's an aerial photograph just to show you the location of the existing hangar. And here is a block plan of the existing hangar on the site. It is currently a metal-clad building with a single ridge, with some hard standing at the front. Officers are satisfied that the building on site is a lawful hangar. This is the existing building here, existing elevations. The dimensions of the existing building and propose are within the agenda. This is the proposed block plan. The position of the replacement building would be in the same position as the existing. The proposed building would be larger, and there would be additional hard standing as well. Here's the proposed elevations of the proposed hangar. It would have a distinctly different look to the existing hangar on the site. It would make use of vertical oak cladding to the elevations and have actually grass cover to the roof with a single ridge. Here's the side elevations here of the proposed building. And the proposed floor plan here, obviously single-storey building to provide storage for a privately owned aircraft. Let's run you through some site photographs. This is a view from the west looking at the existing hangar building here, and a view looking north beyond the hangar building there. You can see on the right there is an grass air field which is largely unkept. A view here at the time of the site visit of where it is. Members should note that the application is for the replacement building hard standing only, and not for planning permission for any aircraft flying. Privately flying aircraft can be done without planning permission up to 28 days of the year, but that's not before members this evening. If I can draw members' attention to the update sheet for determining issues. You'll note that officers have contacted the Civil Aviation Authority. I can confirm that they have come back to us, in which they've confirmed that they don't have jurisdiction on any unlicensed airfields such as Rockwood, and they have not wished to specifically comment on the size of the proposed replacement hangar building. That is just for you to note. In terms of the determining issues with this application, members will note that sites within the green belt, and officers' view is that the proposed replacement building would be larger. However, there are circumstances set out within the report which we think justify the proposed scale of the building. Impact on landscape character and visual amenity, also matters of judgment, because of the proposed replacement building would appear better in the landscape with oak cladding and a grass roof. Impact on residential amenity, it is the impact you're considering is the replacement building itself and hard standing rather than any flying, and assessment of very special circumstances there which are set out within the report. So officers therefore recommend permission be granted. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Tim. And now this item is subject to speaking, and I understand the procedure has been explained. May I introduce you to the objector, Mr. Unwin. Good evening, Mr. Unwin. You have 4 minutes from when you begin to speak.
My name is Paul Unwin, and I have lived with my wife and family at Pastures Farm Bungalow since we bought the property in 1968. Our bungalow is situated about 250 metres to the east of the fly path of any aircraft taking off and landing on the grass airstrip. To the best of my knowledge, there have been no aircraft movements on this airstrip over the past 40 years. Over this period, the fields on which the old airstrip is situated have been used primarily for cattle grazing. I'd like to make a number of key points. 1, the planning application for a new larger hangar is less about the size and scale of construction, but more to do with the knock-on effect of operating a substantial jet prop aircraft in this tranquil part of the Surrey Hills AONB. There has been no consultation by the applicants or their agents with local residents, and by that I mean not only the owners of the 7 or 8 properties in the immediate vicinity of the flight path, but those in the hamlets of Sandhills and Brook, where the sound of a jet prop landing and taking off would be very invasive. Although Surrey County Council seem to have dismissed any safety concerns with regard to the close proximity of footpath 598 and the drive to 4 properties, an aircraft operating from the airstrip would be a matter of only 20 feet or so above it. This surely must be a safety concern. The application gives no indication of what refuelling facilities would be required or where such facilities would be sited in relation to the public footpath. Now, with regard to the Planning Department's report, first, impact on residential amenity. It talks of a modern domestic plane and type of small-scale plane. The committee should note that a Pilatus PC-12NG cannot be described as a small-scale or domestic, as it is capable of carrying 9 passengers and crew. We do not know the expected frequency of flights. 28 days a year has been stated. How are these flights to be monitored? We need a lot more information about this. Assessment of very special circumstances. Clearly, this is key as to whether the committee should approve this application or not, because basically this revised application is almost identical to the previous one, particularly with regard to the constraints and restrictions. The report implies that to reconstruct the old hangar to virtually its existing size would not conform to the requirements of a larger modern aircraft. But if the hangar was to be used as previously, i.e. for a small leisure aircraft, my guess would be that there would be few, if any, objections. Intended use of aircraft. If the committee has not already picked up on this, the agents for the applicants, Planet Consulting, when making their submission for the first application, stated in a letter dated the 12th of August 2015, Mr. Shaw is a businessman and a hotelier with properties around Europe. There is a requirement for the aircraft as the applicant's work involves extensive overseas travel. Now, in your report, condition 4 clearly states the hangar building hereby permitted shall not be used other than for the storage of aircraft, for private domestic purposes, and not for any other use, including as a commercial or business use. My conclusion, in view of the aforementioned, I would submit that the committee has no choice other than to refuse permission for this application. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Unwin. And now, may I introduce the supporter, Janet Long, to speak. Good evening, Mrs. Long, and you have 4 minutes from when you start.
Good evening, councillors. I'm here to speak in support of the application for planning permission for the erection of the new hangar to replace an existing hangar located on the property. Its replacement is required on the basis of the dimensions of the owner's private aeroplane. The replacement hangar will serve the runway which lies immediately adjacent and to the northwest of the hangar. The runway and hangar serve the main dwelling house on the estate and will be used by the new property owner. As officers and members are aware, the estate has been left to become quite run down over recent years. However, the new owner is investing a considerable amount of money on improving the property, both the main house, replacement of derelict garages, and extension and upgrade of the lodge and pool house. Planning permission has already been granted for a number of these projects. A considerable amount of money has been spent on replacing fencing and reseeding of farmland. As part of the overall improvements to Rockwood, the owner now wishes to replace the existing hangar. The replacement structure is of a size which reflects the owner's light aircraft and is the absolute minimum size required. We'd like to confirm also that the plane will be refuelled off-site, and there is no intention to run a business for commercial purposes from the hangar, and it would be used for the owner applicant's personal transport. Although larger than the existing structure, it will still be used for storage and maintenance of the aircraft, and in this respect the proposal accords with the terms of the National Planning Policy Guidelines, which does allow replacement of an existing building in the Greenbelt, provided it is for the same use. We note your officers have taken the view that the proposed new building is materially larger than the existing structure. However, as I've just outlined, the replacement is the minimum required for this modern aircraft, and in this respect can be no smaller. However, it's also noted that your officers recognise that the proposal will result in the removal of an unsightly existing building, the existing hangar, which will further deteriorate if left unused. For this reason, your officers consider that very special circumstances do exist which allow permission to be granted for the replacement of the building, and accordingly are recommending permission is granted. We hope members will agree with the merits of the scheme and grant permission. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Long. And I think that's all the speakers. Members, over to you. Councillor Holder.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Living approximately a quarter of a mile from this application, I suppose I could be considered a local. I often walk along the footpath. The current building is a dilapidated tin shack with what looks like an asbestos roof. It is in an appalling state of repair, and I believe that its removal would be beneficial to the environment and its replacement would enhance the landscape. At present, the field, which was an old airfield and has since been used by cattle, is now unused and will in time revert to thistles and nettles. To bring it back to its use as an airfield would greatly be beneficial to the surrounding countryside. Situated as we are, next to the army training areas of Elsted Common and Hankley Common, as well as our proximity to Farnborough, we are constantly plagued by Chinook helicopters and light aircraft by as much as 20 flyovers a day. If we are mindful to grant this application, the applicant will be restricted under permitted development rules to operate his aircraft for no more than 28 days in any 1 year, an insignificant increase in the present use of the skies above our heads. The use of the aircraft must be for private domestic use only, as stipulated in Condition 4. I therefore, in support of the officer's recommendation and the Parish Council, have no hesitation in supporting this application.
Thank you, Councillor Martin.
Thank you. We have essentially, as far as I'm concerned, a replacement hangar. The hangar is bigger than the existing hangar, but it's much less in terms of footprint and size than the hangar, the permission for which was refused a short time ago. So I think this will be an improvement in the shape of a better building. I think the other aspects of flying and so on and so forth are very much not for our consideration here, although I do note the 28-day rule and I note Condition 4, which would surely go a long way to giving comfort to those who might object. So I have to say, given all of the circumstances that I can see here, I would go along with the officer recommendation.
Thank you. Are there any more speakers? Councillor Holder.
I'd like to propose an additional condition, and that is that aviation fuel should not be stored on site. I think it is dangerous and it could be set alight by vandals, and I don't think it should be allowed. Thank you.
Is that possible?
Yes, Chairman.
Okay. I would just like to say, as this is in my ward, that I find this a very ambiguous set of details in the report. I'm interested to know what the very special circumstances are. Is inappropriate development proposed? Yes, the report says that. Do very special circumstances exist? I don't know what they are, apart from the fact that an old, dilapidated hangar will be replaced, but I can't see that that's very special. And do such circumstances clearly outweigh the potential harm caused? I don't think there are any very special. So I'd be interested to know what the officers, if I may ask them what the very special circumstances are. If you don't mind indulging me, please, in short.
Thank you, Chairman. Well, I would draw members' attention to page 42 and 43 of the report, where we have tried to set out what we feel could amount to very special circumstances. In these tests, it's for the applicant to satisfy the council that there are very special circumstances, and as I think we've hinted at here, it is a slightly difficult one. It is a judgment, but in this particular context, we have an existing building, the lawful use for which is a hangar. The argument has been put forward that it's not fit for purpose in its size, and therefore the applicant is asking for a bigger building for it to be fit for purpose. There will be beneficial points coming out in terms of the removal of the building, and as the report says, it is a matter of judgment, but in this instance we feel that those circumstances are very special and outweigh the harm to the green belt, but it is ultimately for members to come to that conclusion.
Councillor Martin.
Thank you. Yes, I take the view that despite the fact it's a dilapidated building, it is still a hangar, and it could be so amended that a plane could fly from there. I think it would be perverse. I mean, it's already there. It's already impinging upon the green belt as we understand it today. I think it would be perverse for this committee to then say, oh, well, we're going to take that away or disallow it. And I think it's reasonable to replace it with something bigger. And it looks to be with the green roof, which it will be environmentally quite friendly. And I think that there'll be no grounds, in my view, for turning this down on the grounds of it being in the green belt.
Councillor Martin.
I think we have to sort of remove the fact that this is a building for an aircraft for a second, because essentially the aircraft movements are not up for debate. If this was a small garage for a vehicle, we wouldn't have a problem with it. And if the owner wished to make that garage bigger for a newer vehicle, I don't think this committee would have a difficulty with it. Essentially, I'm making a building slightly bigger for the purpose of which it is designed. Not everybody, I certainly don't have the privilege of being able to go to work in an airplane for only 28 days a year. But there are people in society that do. Good luck to them. I think it would be, as Councillor Martin Senior has said, somewhat perverse of us to turn around and say that this can't happen on the basis that the use is already there, the hangar is already there, and we are simply making it bigger for a more modern vehicle. And I'd be happy to support the officer's recommendations.
Thank you, Councillor Martin. Councillor Upton.
Thank you, Chairman. With respect to the 28 days movement aircraft, all aircraft have to fill in a flight plan before they're allowed to go into airspace in this country, so I would imagine it would be an easy case for somebody to monitor the movements of this aircraft on this particular field, if that's of any assistance.
Thank you. Are there any other comments? Okay, so the recommendation is... Oh, sorry, yes, we've had a suggestion that we have an extra condition that no aviation fuel is stored in or near this hangar. Who proposed that? Sorry. Do we have a seconder? Yes, Councillor James. And are we agreed that... Councillor Martin?
Sorry, if I could just ask one question. This might seem a bit daft, but I'm assuming that would not preclude the storage of aviation fuel within the aircraft itself, because that would be somewhat self-defeating.
Very good point.
We could phrase it to make sure that there wasn't any ambiguity on that point, Councillor Martin.
So we're agreed that the recommendation is that, subject to conditions 1 to 5 and informatives 1 to 3 as set out on pages 44 to 46 of the report, permission be granted. May I have those in favour of the recommendation to grant, please?
Eight in favour.
Those against?
None.
And abstentions?
2.
Thank you, members. The recommendation to grant is agreed. So this item, this is the next item, A3, WA 2015-1749, Bramblecroft, The Fairway, Godalming, GU7 1PG. Jen, would you like to introduce the application to the committee, please?
Thank you, Chairman. The application is for the erection of extensions and alterations to an existing bungalow to provide a two-storey dwelling. The site is located within the developed area of Godalming, wherein development is considered acceptable subject to the impact on visual and residential amenities. The application site, outlined in red, is located to the north of the fairway. There are neighbouring residential properties to the north, south, east and west. The site comprises a detached dwelling and a detached garage, and there is established hedging on the west and east boundaries and trees and hedging to the north. The existing dwelling is a bungalow with a maximum ridge height of 4.4 metres and has a single-storey flat roof rear extension, which is shown here. These are the existing floor plans. As stated earlier, the application is for a first floor extension to create a two-storey dwelling, together with a front-facing ground floor bay window, which is shown here, and a rear single-storey extension, which is here. The distance to the boundary at its closest point for the two-storey element is here, and this is 4 metres. There is good space between the properties, particularly when viewed from the street scene. These are the front and rear elevations. The proposed height of the resultant dwelling would be 7.5 metres. The roof would include a cat slide roof, front-facing gable, and hips on the side elevations. This is the proposed ground floor plan with a single-storey rear extension which accommodates a kitchen, an extended kitchen, and this is the proposed bay window here at the front. This is the proposed first floor plan, which would accommodate 5 bedrooms. There would be no first floor side-facing windows on the main side elevations, here and here. The distance from the boundary for the side-facing window here would be 13 metres. This is the proposed street scene. It shows the dwelling with high pines here and Heathergate here. The existing bungalow is shown in dashed lines, and that's the height of it there. So the matters of principal and technical opinion are the principle of development, which, as I said earlier, the site is located within the developed area of Godalming, where development is considered acceptable, subject to the impact on visual and residential amenities, the effect on the integrity of the SPA, and highways and parking provision. The matters of planning judgment which councillors are asked to consider this evening are the impact on visual amenity, impact on residential amenity, provision of amenity space, and impact on trees. I draw the councillors' attention to the update sheet provided. An additional representation was received following the publication of the agenda, which comments on the loss of light to a neighbour's ground floor window. Officers have considered these views, and as demonstrated on the diagram within the update sheet and shown here on the presentation, the proposed extension would intersect the 45-degree line at approximately 9 metres for the ground floor window. However, given the orientation of the dwelling, the cat slide roof form, and the existing vegetation on this boundary, the proposal would not affect sunlight to high pines from mid to late morning onwards. Therefore, the proposal would not be materially harmful, and it would be difficult to sustain a reason for refusal on the grounds of loss of light or neighbouring amenity. The update sheet also proposes an additional informative relating to considerate parking and unloading of construction vehicles. The recommendation is therefore that permission is granted as set out on page 4 of the update sheet. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Jen. This application is subject to speaking, so I believe the process has been explained to you. And Mr. Lambert, you are the objector. Good evening, and you have 4 minutes from when you start speaking.
This proposal fails the Waverley adopted planning policies on 7 major points, starting with the local plan. Policy D1 item B, development will not be permitted where there is harm to the visual character of a locality in respect of the design and scale of the development and in its relationship to surroundings. With over a 200% increase in volume, the proposal will be one of the largest houses in the fairway, but on one of the smallest plots, with a high size to plot ratio, hence its scale is too large. Therefore, it fails this policy. D1 item C, development will not be permitted where there is material loss of light enjoyed by neighbours. The side area of the proposal will involve an increase from about 15 square metres to 56 square metres when viewed from the ground floor of Heathergate. That's over a 350% increase. Facing southwest, the principal habitable rooms of Heathergate and its garden will be materially affected by loss of light, particularly during the winter months when the sun is low in the sky. The pictures in the document I sent you show how overbearing it will be and how it will cause such a loss of light. Therefore, it fails this policy. D4, item A. The development should be appropriate to the site in terms of scale and height. The current footprint of the bungalow has the largest size to plot ratio in the fairway. Adding a second floor and additional extensions will result in a very oversized house compared with its small plot. Therefore, it fails this policy. D4 item C. The development should not significantly harm the amenities of occupiers of neighbouring properties by way of overlooking loss of light or sunlight or overbearing appearance. We've shown that it does all this in a number of ways. Over 200% increase in volume, closeness to the boundaries, over 350% increase in the size as viewed from Heathergate, overbearing appearance and loss of light to both Heathergate and High Pines. The photographs, again in the document I sent you, clearly show this. It fails this policy. D4 item E. The development should protect or enhance the appearance of the street scene. No other houses in the fairway are side on to the rear of another house other than Little Spinney, which is side on to the rear of Maryland, which is in the drive. But Little Spinney is a chalet bungalow with significantly less profile facing the rear of Maryland. A full-height 5-bedroom house side on to the rear of Heathergate will certainly be out of keeping with the street scene of the fairway. Therefore, it fails this policy. Moving on to the residential extensions, SPD, Section 7. We believe the proposal does break the 45-degree rule for extensions, as the extended western elevation of the proposal will be within 9 metres of the front bedroom window of High Pines. The design of a small cat-slit roof is irrelevant. Therefore, it fails this test. And finally, under Section 8, 2-storey extensions should be at least 3 metres from the boundary with a neighbouring property. Our measurements show that the 2-storey element of the proposal starts within 2 metres of the boundary with Heathergate, and therefore it contravenes this test. The case officer says in her report just now that the distance is over 4 metres at its closest point. That's a big difference, and we'd like to know where she gets her measurement from, because we've checked this on the location plan, on Google Maps, and by sticking a tape measure through the hedge. It's not over 4 metres. It's not 3 metres, it's about 2 metres, and therefore it fails this policy. Councillors, this proposal fails on 7 major policy points, and we fail to understand how this application can be recommended for approval by the case officer. So on behalf of the 11 objecting neighbours, we trust that you will agree with us and reject this application. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Lambert. And now we have the supporter, Liz Deer, to speak. Good evening, Mrs. Deer. You have 4 minutes from when you start speaking.
Thank you. First of all, there were a lot of policies mentioned there. This has already been checked against the policies by the people who are trained to do it, and at the moment they're recommending it for approval.
Mrs. Deer, sorry, could I ask you just to pull the microphone close to you? Yeah, that's
okay.
It. Lovely, thank you.
Thank you. This is actually the 15th time I've put a first floor onto a bungalow in the settlement area of Waverley, and by that I mean a full first floor, not a chalet. I've done chalets as well. In all those cases, like this, it was usually a single bungalow surrounded by houses. In that situation, this form of extension is allowed, providing we meet all the other criteria. Now, the nearest one that I did to this was in One Park Chase in Busbridge, and that was only a metre from both its fence boundaries. It was a large 3-bedroom bungalow that I changed into a 5-bedroom house. It has exactly the same relationship to 26 Quarter Mile Road as this has to Bramblecroft, and it is the same distance away. Yes, I've got greater distances to boundaries here. In fact, I've also stuck a tape measure through, and it is 2.7 metres to the closest point, and it widens out to 5.7 metres towards Heathergate. There were a lot of objections about loss of privacy from the houses behind. I have more than the 22 metres required between first floor windows. We have actually 55 metres. But it's interesting that of all those objections, and most of the objections were loss of privacy, nobody mentioned the fact that there is actually a row of 5-metre high holly trees that form the rear boundary of Bramblecroft. The eaves of this proposal is going to be 4.8, therefore the window head height will be 4.8, so anyone looking out of the 2 new bedroom windows to the rear will actually be looking at holly trees. People have said that this is far too big for its site, which is slightly concerning because the fairway doesn't have a special status. It is subject to the same criteria as the whole of Busbridge. And if you look at all the things that have gone on in the drive and nearby, this is no worse by any means. And interestingly, the plot size is actually very similar, if not bigger, than quite a few on the drive, including the 2 new big houses that were built next to overtanks. They are 3-storey, 6-bedroom houses, and their plots are exactly the same size. They're just a different shape. And also there's under 2 metres between those 2 new houses and 2 metres to overtanks. We have far more distance to our neighbours in this situation. There was also the new house built next to 142 Busbridge Lane. That is a house that is the same size as this will be, and it's on a plot that is just over half the size of Bramblecroft. It's 0.047 of a hectare. And that relationship to number 146 Busbridge Lane, which is also angled, the nearest part of the 2-storey elements is 12.2 metres away. High Pines are concerned that being in front of them, and we are close to them and all the rest of it. Again, you have an example in Busbridge Lane of 114 Busbridge Lane, which is having a first floor extension, a loft extension built at the moment. Now, for that, they had to raise the eaves by 0.7 and the ridge by 1.4. That house is 5.5 metres in front of its neighbour 112, and it's only 2.5 metres away from it. And that was allowed. I think that's more or less what I've got to say. I think the spacing around this plot is fine. The house will look good in its street scene.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Deere. And so, members, now over to you. Councillor Martin.
Before we commence a discussion on this, can I please ask officers to comment on this question of how close the extension is to the boundary and the repercussions, if any, of it, please? Thank you.
Chairman, if I may. The plan that is submitted as part of the application shows a distance for the single-storey element at the rear. So this is, this position here to be 2.7 metres to the boundary. The position where the property becomes 2-storey, the plan indicates a distance of 4 metres. I would like to remind members that the SPD provides you with helpful guidance, and you must look at the site circumstances when assessing each individual case, taking into account also things such as separation to the neighbouring property, the spaciousness around the properties, the height of the proposal, and the character of the area. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. Councillor Martin.
So I did ask for your view on the materiality of that. So you're saying that we can take that into account, it's some guidance, but are you saying that the distance to the next house, house to house, is something of greater importance, or is the meterage from the boundary where a recommendation of 4 is made, but it's only guidance? I'm not quite sure what you're saying.
Chairman, if I could pick that up. I think the point that we're making, Councillor Martin, is the guidance is there to guide officers in giving advice to applicants, the member of the public, and also to guide us in making our recommendations to you. But it is just a starting point, and there may be circumstances in which sometimes you choose to demand more than the guidance, or sometimes you're prepared to accept slightly less than the guidance. And it should never be, I think the SPD itself says it's not a blueprint, it's not a black and white situation, it's a guideline. In this particular instance, I think the point that Catherine is making is the SPD generally indicates that there should be 3 metres separation between 2-storey extensions and the boundary of a neighbouring property. But actually the particular circumstances that's envisaging is where 2-storey extensions extend beyond the rear building line of a property, whereby a 2-storey extension could be dominant to the gardens on either side. That's why we have that 3-metre guideline. Where we've got a situation where it's an actual side building line of a property, and we're looking at whether or not the property would be acceptably sited in its context, as we are here, there have been instances where we've only required 1 metre to the boundary to prevent a terracing effect with perhaps a neighbouring property. So the 3-metre guidance isn't particularly critical in this instance. It's really about whether or not there's sufficient space between the property that's proposed and the actual footprint in relation to the boundary, and whether or not it would appear visually intrusive for not being too close to the boundary. Clearly, because of the orientation of the neighbouring property, the relationship with that property is also critical. But then it's about whether you feel it's too close to the garden, whether it's too close to the property itself, rather than relying solely on the actual distance. And as you'll see from the report, it isn't an easy one, because the application site is virtually surrounded by other development. But we do feel it's acceptably spaced. And this sort of relationship certainly isn't unusual in this particular part of Godalming, as members will be aware. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Elizabeth. Councillor Martin.
Thank you. I think the key here is those matters that are for members' judgment, and I think that the key ones are the visual and residential amenity. I accept the technical matters, I accept the principle of the development, I accept that we're in the built-up area of Godalming. What I think is key to this is the juxtaposition with this application site and the 2 neighbouring properties. I think in particular it's High Pines and Heathergate that are most affected by this site, others to a lesser extent. And yes, there are this is by no means unique in the Busbridge area, and there are others. Simply saying that there are other similar bungalows that have been converted into houses nearby, for me personally, is not in and of itself critical here, because every site has its uniqueness. We have to make our decision on the application site in front of us, not necessarily just because of the relationship that other houses have with one another. And I accept that Park Chase has a very similar juxtaposition, but again, it's a different area. I still feel, despite what one of the speakers has said about the size of this plot being the same as others on the drive, that this is still a relatively large house being proposed on a relatively small plot for the fairway. Not the smallest, I accept, and not the biggest house, I accept. But I think there is perhaps less residential amenity for the amenity space for the occupiers within the garden. By the time you've got the garage and the drive and the house, actually what you're looking at is a relatively small garden, and I still have a bit of difficulty with that. I am somewhat betwixt and between as to whether I would support the officer's recommendations or not. At the moment, I am erring towards perhaps not, and I think it's the judgment factor that I'm struggling most with. And I wonder if officers could perhaps comment that should the committee decide to vote against this, particularly on the grounds of the amenity of the neighbouring properties, how strong that case would be, because I appreciate that's a judgment call, but I would welcome the officer's recommendations. I appreciate that you've made your judgment call and deciding on approving it, but it would help me, for my mind, just to give me some indication of what strength the other side of the knife might perhaps be.
Thank you, Chairman. I think if the committee were to refuse this, and it is a judgment, you would need to be very specific about what harm this development does cause. Clearly, there is quite a lot of concern about it, but I hope that in our report we've been quite comprehensive in identifying all the relevant criteria that you need to take into account and going through each one and explaining why we've come to the conclusion that there may well be some change in terms of the impact on other properties, but that change is not, in our view, overriding and materially harmful to the point at which permission should be refused. That is the same analysis that any planning inspector would have to go through. May come to a different point of view. We certainly look very carefully at it and go on site as he would in any appeal situation. But I have to say, bearing in mind the experience we've had of appeal decisions, I think that this would probably be one where an inspector may come to the same conclusion as officers. But it is a judgment. It is a judgment. Thank you.
Thank you, Elizabeth. Councillor James.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I am happy to support the officer's recommendation. I can't see anywhere in the agenda is what I call that it's a special site that can only have single dwellings in single plots. I think I would have trouble if this applicant had come with two dwellings on this spot in a brown residential area, because then that would be out of keeping with what is there. As far as I can see, that they are all individual dwellings of individual sizes in individual size plots. Therefore, I've got no problem with it. And perhaps a bungalow between two-storey houses is more out of keeping with the two-storey dwellings in the fairway. It looks to me as though High Pines, I call the front right bit, is almost as close to the boundary as this single-storey extension that's proposed on the neighbouring dwelling. And the house on the right, Heather Gate, is as far removed to the right-hand side of the proposed dwelling, that being as close to the boundary, I don't think would have any impact on the garden of Heathergate, although obviously the residents of that house do think so. But I can see no planning reasons to object to it, and I will support the officer's recommendation. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Wheatley.
Thank you, Chairman. I agree it's a big house, but to my mind, I think it seems quite sensitively designed. We've been told the side walls are without windows, which presumably therefore mean they would not be able to overlook High Pines or Heathergate. I wonder maybe whether we could sort of put in a condition about maintaining the hedge at the rear to avoid overlooking the gardens of the rear properties. I don't know if that would be possible. Or another thing that crosses my mind, yes, it is a large building. Is there any way we can ensure that it remains a single dwelling? Thank you.
The simple answer to that, Councillor Wheatley, is that if it were to be converted into two dwellings, it would need planning permission and would come within the council's control. We would be able to enforce that. So, from that reason, you don't need it. You don't need a condition. But thank you.
And what about the suggestion about a condition about the hedge?
Thank you, Chairman. I think the difficulty with such a condition is that clearly any condition that you impose needs to be reasonable, necessary and enforceable. The experience of putting such conditions on over time is that they have sometimes found to be unreasonable, and that if the hedge were to be removed, then the replacement of it wouldn't be able to grow to the point at which the existing hedge were previously at. So that the argument is that rather than rely on a hedge to avoid overlooking, you need to be satisfied that the situation is self-enforcing, and that is why, beyond the point of the tree screen and the hedge, we've taken the view that the design of the application needs to be in itself capable of not creating overlooking, and that's why, for example, there are no windows on the side, but from the rear viewpoint, the juxtaposition is acceptable in its own right. Because if you rely on a hedge to avoid overlooking and the hedge dies, you've got an unacceptable situation. So I hope that clarifies that. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Elizabeth. Are we content with that? Yes. Councillor Martin.
Thank you. I do accept that this is difficult, and I think for me the first two items, the visual amenity and the impact on residential amenity of neighbours, are the two most important things. And I have to say that I think my concern is primarily with Heathergate. And I think although there's a 20-metre boundary, what we have is the new large side of the proposed home at Bramblecroft, which is now going to be facing the rear of Heathergate. If Heathergate were turned around and had its sort of side elevation facing the side elevation of Bramblecroft, I wouldn't be concerned. So I think that the loss of light, the loss of amenity to Heathergate, in my view, is sufficient for me to go with a disagreement with officers. And I will not therefore be supporting them. I think it is a large house on a small plot. I'm less concerned with that. I'm not so sure it is to a degree out of keeping with the street scene, but for me the impact on the neighbour at Heathergate is the most significant factor, and I'll be voting against the recommendation.
Councillor Upton.
Thank you, Chairman. Looking at the location plan on page 47, I have no problem with the location and the size of this building in comparison with the other detailed buildings in and around. I think it's very well appointed. It's been carefully considered, and if the existing building, single-storey building, has been granted permission, that is within the 1 metre element of the hedge. That's been granted, so we can't accept that as being a controlling feature in this particular application, as it's already there. I support this application.
Thank you, Councillor Upton. Are there any more comments or questions? So the recommendation is that, subject to conditions 1 to 7 and informatives 1 to 4, are we happy with the extra informative about loading and unloading? Excuse me. Yes, we agree with that. So informatives 1 to 4, set out on pages 64 to 66 of the report, permission be granted. May I have those in favour of the recommendation to grant, please?
It's 8 in favour to grant.
Those against?
It's 2.
No abstentions. Thank you, members. Please excuse me. The recommendation to grant is agreed. Now we move on to the non-speaking items. And this is item B1, WA 20151596. Moores Cottage, Moores Lane, Elstead, GU8 6DN. Thank you. Catherine, would you like to introduce the application to the committee, please?
Thank you, Chairman. The application site outlined in red is located at the western end of Moores Lane. It comprises a detached 2-storey property set in a spacious plot. The site is outside of the rural settlement boundary, but the rural settlement boundary does follow this line I'm indicating on the plan here. This is a photograph of the existing property at the rear, and this is a photograph just of the front of the property. These are the existing elevations. As you can see, it is a substantial two-storey property. There have been previous extensions and alterations, and currently there is a small annex on the ground floor with a kitchenette, living area and bedroom. These are the proposed elevations. As you can see, the proposal is for a single-storey extension. The rear elevation. The extension would provide for an enlarged annex. The small kitchenette area here would be demolished as part of the proposals. Apologies for the layout of this slide. The site has been the subject of a previous application under the reference number quoted here for a similar extension, the elevations shown therewith. That application was refused by the council and subsequently appealed by the applicant. The application was refused owing to its conflict with Local Plan Policy RD2. The applicant had argued as part of the submission that the site should be treated as an exception to Policy RD2, owing to its proximity and relationship with the settlement boundary, a scenario which is set out in the supporting text to Local Plan Policy RD2. However, in dismissing the appeal, the inspector, whilst acknowledging the relationship of the site to Elstead, concluded that paragraph 11.28 of the local plan and its exception contained therein is inconsistent with the current national policy approach to greenbelts set out in the NPPF. Therefore, the inspector concluded that the relevant test for this extension to a property in the greenbelt was one of proportionality. Owing to the extent and projection of the extension, the inspector concluded it would be disproportionate and that there were no very special circumstances in this case that existed to outweigh the harm in principle to the greenbelt. That decision is a highly material consideration to which members must attach significant weight to in reaching their conclusions this evening. If I can just draw members briefly to the update sheet, pages 4 and 5. The applicant has provided a further letter in response to the officer's report, which I understand has also been circulated to members of the committee. I shan't repeat that. You have that there in front of you to take account of. The matters of principle and technical opinion, shown on this side of the screen, are the principle of development, being mindful that the site is located outside of a settlement boundary within the greenbelt, the planning history to which I've already referred you to, and any differences with the previous proposal, and the effect upon the SPAs and SAC. Members are being asked to exercise their judgment with regards to those greenbelt considerations, together with the impact on landscape character and visual amenity, the impact on residential amenity, and parking provision. The recommendation remains as set out on the printed update sheet, that permission be refused for the reasons 1 to 4 in the agenda and informatives 1 to 2, set out on pages 86 and 87. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Catherine. Members, over to you. Councillor Ells.
Thank you, Chairman. As the ward councillor, I do know this house and this site very well. Moor Lane and its surroundings are basically a fairly high-density residential area, and Moor Cottage is the second to last house in the lane, so it is very much part of the village residential settlement, even though it's technically outside the settlement boundary. We've heard quite a lot tonight about things being taken on their merits and design guides not being hard and fast rules, and aircraft hangars being increased by 250% and all that sort of thing. I see no reason why we shouldn't treat this on its merits. It is virtually part of the settlement. It's a fairly modest extension that they're after, and there are very good reasons for the family to have this extension. And my tendency is to disagree with the officer's recommendation. Thank you.
Councillor Martin.
I have to say I take a very similar view. I mean, yes, technically it's just outside the boundary, but the house is there and there's a request to make it bigger. It's 17%, about a fifth less than that which was rejected by the appeal inspector. But I have to say, this is so close to the boundary of the village, and is an expansion of an existing house. I really don't see the huge impact on the green belt that this would cause, and unless I hear some other arguments to the contrary, I will be voting against the recommendation and for the proposal.
Thank you. Councillor Martin.
I seem to be following you quite a lot tonight. I also share those thoughts. I think, given the proximity to the settlement, I think in some ways this, for me, it would create special circumstances, albeit perhaps not sort of greenbelt special circumstances. I think the proximity is so close to the settlement that I'm entirely comfortable with it. In a similar vein from what I said earlier, if this committee were minded to go against the officer's recommendations and approve this, should there be a list of conditions that might be made? Because it sounds as if I'm not the only person in support of this. And if the committee were minded to approve it, do officers feel there should be a list of conditions attached rather than simply blanket approving it with no conditions at all?
If I may, Chairman, I think it would be necessary for you to impose some conditions. I would suggest a condition to preclude any further extensions to the property under permitted development. I would suggest standard conditions of relating to materials and plan numbers, and also, given that this is for an annex to the main dwelling, I would strongly suggest, if members are minded to go against the recommendation and approve it, that you control the use of that annex to ensure it remains ancillary and as a single dwelling house. Thank you, Chairman. Sorry, Chairman, we would also need a reason for granting permission from members.
Chairman, in relation to that reason for granting, that is a requirement of the management order that if the report doesn't reflect the decision, there needs to be an audit trail from the council as to why they've made a decision. So it's a legal requirement to actually explain the decision. But it comes back actually just to the justification for taking this decision, which I feel I do have to comment on. Councillor Ells mentioned the comparison between guidance and the current application. This is slightly different in that this is an application which is being assessed against a local plan policy as opposed to a supplementary planning document, which is effectively material consideration. And whilst the committee are entitled to form a different view, I need to guide you to ensure that you are making that decision in accordance with the provisions of the policy. So as Catherine set out at the beginning, it is in the green belt. The caveat in the current local plan, which invites you to relax green belt policy for extensions because of the proximity to the settlement, has unfortunately been set aside by the inspector's decision. He has indicated that approach is out of date, and the new local plan emerging will not be able to reintroduce that caveat because it is not up to date with the local plan. A property is either in the green belt or it's not in the green belt. If it is in the green belt, which this is, then you need to decide, is it disproportionate? I suspect from what you're saying you are finding that it is disproportionate, although not quite as disproportionate as the previously refused scheme because the comments about the reduction. But if you are finding it disproportionate, you do need to identify very special circumstances. The comment was perhaps not in Greenbelt terms. They need to be in Greenbelt terms because that is the only route for you as decision makers to make an exception in the Greenbelt. So you need to come to a conclusion that if you want to approve it against the fact that it's inappropriate development because it's disproportionate, what are the very special circumstances that you're finding to set aside your policy? I'm sorry to be so legalistic about it, but I do think you want the decision that you make to be legally sound. Thank you, Chairman.
Councillor Holder.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I'd like to just take up a point that Catherine just mentioned, that this is a single dwelling. I was under the impression that the owners were moving into the extension and allowing their son, who's coming back from abroad, to move into the main house, and therefore there would be two separate dwellings. Am I right in thinking that would be a separate entrance to the extension?
Just looking at the plan here, there are obviously internal links maintained between the main part of the dwelling and this annex accommodation. There may well be other entrances that the applicants can use to access different parts of the house, but the application is not for the subdivision of the property to create two separate dwellings. It is for the extension of an existing annex to the property. So were the application site to be subdivided subsequently and for these to be two independently occupied dwellings, that in itself would require express planning permission. Thank you, Chair.
Councillor James.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. It's unusual for me to support the officer's recommendation every single time, but I am, because I was a bit taken aback by a fellow councillor who said it was a modest extension. I cannot believe that the footprint, almost a third again, of the floor plan is considered a modest extension. You know, a conservatory or a single room is a modest, that is, well, we now know that is a new, basically a bungalow attached to the original house, is not a modest extension. It is an independent dwelling attached to the other property. And I think in the words of Prince Charles, I call it a carbuncle. And I wouldn't be supporting it. It is far too big. To the what is a beautiful house, it's now got more extensions at the back than the original house has. It's literally overpowered it. So I would be supporting the officer's recommendation. Thank you.
Councillor Elf.
Thank you, Chairman. It is worth noting that there is already an existing annex there, which relates to Councillor Holder's question. The annex already exists, so it is used as that. I believe the annex was used by a parent, as so many houses in our borough have annexes for aged parents or teenage kids or whatever. So it's only it's enlarging an existing annex. It's not creating a new separate dwelling. Thank you.
Are there any more comments? Councillor Martin.
If I understand Liz correctly, it's a question of whether we believe this is disproportionate or not. That's what it really comes down to. And is it disproportionate within the context of the green belt? The inspector found that as it was disproportionate. It's been reduced by nearly a fifth. Is that sufficient to make it now proportionate? My judgment is yes, in relation to the size of the plot. But I would like some guidance as to whether we need to go further than that if we were minded to go ahead and allow the proposal.
Chairman, if I may. Members, if I could just perhaps refer you to pages 79 through to 80. The test, as with any extension to any building in the Greenbelt, is a question of whether you consider the extension, either individually or cumulatively, to be disproportionate to the original property on the site. So the property, the original property, is agreed to have had a floor area of 287 square metres. This ground floor plan indicates some of the previous extensions to the property here. The extension would have a net increase of 85.25 square metres. This would mean that the property overall has been increased by 144 square metres, or 50% above the original property. That's your starting point for the assessment of whether you consider it to be disproportionate. The guideline, of course, of policy RD2 is 40%. Thank you, Chairman.
Are there any more comments? Councillor Elf.
We come back to this word guideline, don't we? The guideline is 40%. The guidelines aren't set in stone, and as councillors on this committee, I think we can make our own decision as to whether we consider it disproportionate or not. Thank you.
Councillor Martin.
Yeah, I understand that. I have to say, we've long had that guideline of 40%, and I'm not madly happy with it myself, but I think throwing that out might be quite tricky. I think I've changed my mind, and on balance, I prefer to have it down at 40% rather than going at 50%. I shall now be supporting the officers.
Are there any more comments? No? Thank you, members. Then the recommendation is that permission be refused for the reasons 1 to 4 and informatives 1 to 2 as set on pages 86 and 87 of the report. May I have those in favour of the recommendation to refuse, please?
That's 6 in favour of refusing.
And those against refusing?
That's 3.
And any abstentions? No? No. So, thank you, members. The recommendation to refuse is agreed. So there are no items to consider in exempt session. So that concludes the meeting this evening. Thank you, members.
Sorry, members, can I just clarify? I only had 9 people voting there. In which way?
I abstained.
You abstained.
Thank you, members.